Okay, so we'll get started. So, good morning and welcome everybody to the first in a series of educational webinars hosted by Amplifi. My name is Christina de Poitiers. I'm the coordinator for the education program, a sustainability and B Corp consultant, and I will be your host for today's webinar. But before we start on the webinar and proceed with the topic, I'd like to invite Jenny Kitchen onto screen, who's the co-founder of Amplifi, to tell you a bit more about the organisation.
Hi, thanks, Christina. So Amplifi was started by myself, Jenny Kitchen. So I run a brand and digital agency called Yo-Yo, and Pete Kenyon, who is a partner at Cripps law firm. So we both took our organizations through B Corp, the B Corp process, which was fantastic process and really, really good for our organizations. But we knew that this wasn't enough. So we got together a few years ago and created Amplifi. So Amplifi is a not-for-profit, and our goal is to help businesses to reduce their carbon emissions and to help them to create a larger impact within their local communities. So we do that through 5 different areas. So one being Learn, which is what this is. And so we've got playbooks, we've got film screenings, we've got webinars, we've got carbon literacy training, and much, much more. Then the second area is around measurement. So we encourage people and businesses to measure their carbon emissions. So we've got partners to help us do that, and Amplifi support that as well. Then we've got Collaborate. So we've got sector leads, and within these sector groups, then we encourage networking and meetups to advance sort of sector specific best practices. And then ideas that come out from there. The fourth area is action. So we've got things like waste audits, we've got things like community projects, and lots more is happening across this year. And then lastly, we've got share. So we want to be careful with greenwashing, of course, but we also want to promote the businesses that are doing great things. So we've got media partners to help us to do that. So lots and lots of things going on. And if you want to find out more, then go to amplifi.tw or get in touch with myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. And please, if you'd like to find out more about Amplifi, we'll be sending out information after the webinar, and we will also be recording this webinar, which will be going on to the Amplifi website after the session. And so to move on to today's topic, which is on the subject of digital sustainability and how to cut your carbon emissions through conscious tech practices. And we're very, very honoured to be joined today by Chris Lewis and Bailey Bryan from Wholegrain. And they're going to give us a sneak peek of their digital declutter toolkit, which is due to be launched in March. We hope that by the end of this session, you should have a list of actionable steps to start to tackle the digital footprint of both your business, but also of yourselves. But before I hand over to Chris, I'd like to do a short poll just to give us a sense of where you all are on this subject. So I'd like to pop up question number 1 for you, first of all. So if you could answer this, how confident do you feel that you can take concrete steps to make your digital practices more sustainable? Are you not at all confident, or are you very confident? And if you could submit that answer, we'll be able to pop up the results in a second on your screen. Okay. And while we do that, please use the chat function to introduce yourselves, comment, and ask any questions. We're going to make some time in the Q&A after the presentation to address as many of the questions that you bring up as we possibly can. And also, before we move into the session, we will be asking you to turn off your cameras for the remainder of the session, because that is one of the key elements of video recording that take up quite a significant carbon footprint. Danica, do we have the answer to that first question? So we've got a bit of a range of confidence. We've got about 24% of people are very confident, 42% are somewhat, and then we have the remainder being neutral and unsure. with only 4% at not at all. So that's fantastic. We've got quite a lot of confidence in the room. Hopefully we can bring that up before the end of the session. And then the second question we have, we could just pop that up on the screen, Danica. So how informed do you feel about specific actions you can take to reduce the environmental impact of your digital activities? Is that not at all or very? Please submit that again. And we should be able to get those answers up very shortly. And we'll be asking you these questions again at the end of the session. So hopefully we'll see an increase after all of the information that Wholegrain will be sharing with us very shortly. And yes, please do pop your information into the chat. It's lovely to hear where you're all coming from, where you're calling in from. And again, yeah, so we've got a range again. So 15% not at all informed and 15% very informed. So hopefully we'll give you all a fair amount of information. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Chris to kick off this session and tell you a little bit more about Wholegrain and why Wholegrain are getting into digital sustainability. So please, Chris, go ahead.
Thank you, Christina. Good morning, everybody. I get the very easy part this morning, which is the introduction to a company that I already work for. So I shall pass through these and then I will introduce you through to Bailey. So Bailey, if you could just pop forward for me. As Christina mentioned, my name is Chris. I'm the MD at Wholegrain Digital. I have with me Bailey, who is our new business manager. Bailey is doing the brunt of the work today, so I'll keep my part brief and then we'll get through to Bailey as quick as we can. At Wholegrain, our mission is to accelerate the shift to a greener internet. And that means an internet that's good for people and also good for the planet. And that starts for us with education and empowerment. And so hopefully we can pass some of our knowledge on to you today to slightly demystify the concept of digital sustainability so that you can take more confident first steps on your own path to making your own part of the internet a little bit greener. So how did we all get here today? If we could just move on. There are 3 routes into today's webinar. That isn't an existential question, by the way. How did we get here? Don't panic. We're not getting into the meaning of life on a Tuesday morning. There are 3 routes in essentially today. One through Curiously Green, which some of you may already know, and you've signed up via that. Curiously Green is a Wholegrain's newsletter. I would be absolutely remiss if I did not give it a plug here as well. It's currently in the process of evolving past the newsletter and into something a little bit more helpful to further our mission of spreading digital sustainability and the knowledge of that. So perfect time to pop over to our website and sign up. You could be here because you'll come through one of our collective networks or that you know somebody on the call, or you could be here because you've come through Amplifi, as Jenny mentioned at the top. So hopefully, however you've come to us today, there's already this shared understanding that as a community, we are much stronger and knowledge is much better when it is shared. So that's what we're here to do for you today. So a little bit more context about Wholegrain. I wanted to start by just taking you through some history. So we've been designing and building websites for people and planet for 17 years. We were founded essentially to prove that business can and definitely should be done differently. And so for our founders, that meant not only creating a business that could be financially viable, but also a business that could champion change, champion sustainability, and also champion progress within our space. So we recognized quite quickly that in order to do that, we needed to do 2 very specific things. Number 1, we needed to lead in our field. And number 2, we then needed to share that knowledge as leaders within our space. So fast forward today, and we're proudly B Corp certified, meaning that we hold ourselves accountable to staying true to those ethical values that we were founded on. We give at least 1% of our annual profits back to organizations and individuals who are positively impacting the planet. We're also a member of Charity Comms, and we are also Clean Creative approved, but it doesn't just stop with our work. We have a number of ethical policies in place that help steer us forward also, such as our no fly for work policy, our vegan food policy, and also our ethical screening policy to ensure that we only work with organizations that are completely aligned with our values and our ethos. For our team, we want to also show that we don't just say we're ethical and sustainable, we want to prove that we are. So a couple of examples here of that: we are certified as a vegan inclusive employer. We also offer additional perks to our team if they make more sustainable travel choices through their holiday, through climate perks. So just a couple of the ways in which we make sure that we're not just talking the talk, but when it comes to our values, we are physically showing that we are also willing to walk the walk. And that kind of thinking really is what led us into the digital sustainability space. Excuse me. We created the first and original website carbon calculator, which is our tool for calculating the carbon impact of any web page on the internet. The methodology behind our website carbon calculator is actually the same methodology that a lot of other carbon calculator tools are now based on, which is something we're incredibly proud of. So really, this is all kind of like the top view, right? But what does it look like in practice? Well, you'll note that all of our website design and build clients are completely aligned to our values. They're the logos that you would expect to see. But for digital sustainability, our clients can start to look like a little bit of a stretch. I mean, like BBC, Volkswagen, Condé Nast, they're not brands that you would think of when you think of like impact drivers or pushing forward within the sustainability space. But our approach to digital sustainability really is that we try to get into these bigger companies and bigger organizations, see what they're doing, understand what we're up against, and then affect change, not only from inside there, but take away that knowledge and take away that insight and pour that into other platforms and systems and books and other places where other people can share from that knowledge, like the Sustainable Web Manifesto, for example, or the sneak peek that you're going to get to of our V2 of our Digital Declutter for Business Toolkit today. It's also worth mentioning here that Tom, our founder, actually wrote the book Sustainable Web Design, so we have a pretty solid basis to move from in that space. So our goal is to build a much more resilient web that's reliable enough to serve true and authentic content, that is sustainable enough to not cost the planet in order to do that, and is accessible enough so that not only do the colors and contrasts work, but anyone, anywhere in the world, on any device, can access that content. So that means a resilient web that is purely people-centric. And that feels like the perfect segue for me to pass over to Bailey. So thanks again for joining us. I'll pass to Bailey to take you through the main bulk, and I'll jump into the chat and answer any questions that I can as we go.
Thanks, Chris. Welcome, everyone. And now let's get into the breadth of the content. So when we think about sustainability, you probably think about, biking, taking your bags to the shop, planting trees, but the internet probably isn't the first thing that comes to mind. But the internet is more part of our lives than ever before. We need it to do our jobs, share vital information like this, connect with people, provide entertainment, and everything in between. But all of this does have an effect on global carbon emissions. So much so that the Internet of Things equates to about 1.2% of all global carbon emissions. And it uses about 6 to 12% of all global electricity usage. Now, this may just feel like a percentage to you. Let's give it a little bit of perspective. The international aviation industry accounts for 1.14% of all global carbon emissions. So when we start to get that little bit more tangible of what is actually happening on our behaviors online, we can start to feel that impact. But let's give some more metrics to that. If the internet was a country, it would be the 13th largest polluter. That's similar to Mexico. The three biggest ones are China, USA, and India. So when we start to, again, put it on that global scale, it is one of the big economic powers when it comes to global carbon emissions. But again, this may feel that bit a little macro away from us. So let's talk about something that we've all maybe done even today, Google search. The average visits to Google each day could provide over 3,000 UK homes with heat for a year. Just sit with that. Today, over 8.5 billion searches are happening on Google, and the amount of energy just to search online can provide over 3,000 homes with heat for a year. So it's pretty staggering when we think about it in that case. But with a global impact this large, why is it that we feel so distant from global carbon emissions? It starts with the terminology that we use. Things like Wi-Fi, the cloud, virtual, wireless, all of that feels very tangible and not very physical. But in reality, digital carbon and digital infrastructure is very present in our lands, sea, and space. What does the digital ecosystem actually consist of? The first thing to note is data centers. Data centers are the backbone of the internet. They're servers that process and store all the data that we exchange online. And it requires 24/7 electricity use, not only just to power the systems, but also to prevent them from overheating. They're located all over the world. And it doesn't just host website data, but your data too. So when you think about your emails, phone, notes, etc., it's all in data centers so that you can have that readily available at your fingertips. Because data centers also are relying on electricity, they're also relying on water to cool them down. So it's not just energy usage, but it's resource usage like water as well. The next one we're going to talk about is what's in our air, transmission networks. So physically, we probably have seen these pylons, but what we don't see is actually that transmission of data through the air. We can't see it as such, but it's transferring all the data around the world, and it makes us more connected, but it does have an invisible cost when it comes to energy usage. Next, we have submarine cables. So this is not just in our air, but also in our waters. There are over 2 million cables, thousands of kilometers of fiber cables lying on the bottom of the ocean that, again, help us communicate all around the world. It makes us a globalized community and being able to connect with everyone. This is connecting those data centers all around. But there's so many of these cables that they're long enough to actually go around the world 34 times. Next, we have devices. So energy that's used on end devices make up about 54% of the energy consumed in this system. That means that, in order to do business, we need to be, us as a business, we need to minimize the amount of data transferring from end user devices, as well as educate people like you to be able to know how to manage your own output when it comes to data usage. Next, we have satellites. So not only is it in our air, water, land, it's also in space. The Californian company SpaceX alone launched over 4,700 satellites as part of their Starlink network, which provides broadband internet, but they also have thousands more planned. So this is really what our night sky looks like just outside of Earth, so that we can all do things like this. Now, this might feel very macro. You might feel a bit heavy after I'm telling you some of this stuff. But the reason why I'm showing you this is just to demonstrate how physical the internet actually is. The massive network that quite literally surrounds the entire world. And there's a staggering amount of infrastructure out there to make this connected world that is the internet. But in simple terms, everything we do online has energy. Data equals electricity, electricity equals CO2. But where are the emissions? Like we said, it's in production, data, transmission, end user, and the device end of life. But today, we're going to be focusing on where we can save together. So we're focusing on that reducing server load, reducing data transfer, reducing device energy consumption. Why should you care? Well, there are an immense amount of reasons of why you should care. But I always like to show this comic because I feel like it kind of rings true to everything. When it comes to working towards minimizing carbon emissions and saving resources, it can only equate to good things. We're going to be working towards a better, fairer, more accessible world. But ultimately, nature is a source from which all else grows, including the internet. The internet and its infrastructure is intertwined with us all and our planet. Digital transformation comes with concerns of overdepletion of raw minerals, water usage, pollution, waste creation, and ultimately climate change. There are limited resources on Earth, and there is a competition on who gets what and how those resources are used. But today, we're going to give you a bunch of tips to empower you so that you can not only minimize your carbon emissions, but hopefully spread this information into your networks and within your own businesses as well. So we're going to focus on where and how to minimize the carbon emissions that we have control over. So as it's been teased, we have a digital declutter toolkit. The first version of this was launched in 2019. And with Wholegrain, as well as a number of experts, we've created that version 2, which is going to be launched in 2025. But this call gets a little bit of a sneak peek of what that's going to look like. We've designed it for individuals, so to empower those who feel like, they're that voice of sustainability, whether it's at home or within their own business, and they want to take those individualized actions. But we've also designed tips for businesses so that business owners and managers can actually take the onus off, not just the end users of their audience, but the people within their business, and make sure that they can minimize it at the source. The toolkit will cover all of these topics, so websites and search engines, emails, video and image content creation, IT hardware, video calls and streaming, data centers, and AI. But given the time today, we're only going to focus on a couple of them and only a few tips from there. There's an extensive amount of knowledge in there, so I hope that you all come away from not just this call, but in future feeling empowered to be able to minimize your carbon footprint. So the first thing we're going to talk about is website search and search engines. And our first tip is to make website emissions visible. You can't minimize what you can't measure. So calculating the footprint of websites is very important, as well as your own footprint. So as mentioned, we have the website carbon calculator, which allows you to measure the carbon output of any URL on the internet. So you can put your own website on there, your favorite ones, and just start to get a feel of what kind of impact that is. There's also an amazing website called the Green Web Foundation. This is where you can check if a website is actually being run on renewable energy. So as mentioned, all websites are run through data centers, but you have the power to be able to choose what energy source they're using. So why not make it renewable? And the last one that we recommend is looking at your individual footprint. So there's apps like Freedom, which allow you to block and measure the amount of usage that you have on apps or websites, things like that. And it could be a way to then check yourself and seeing, where am I actually spending my time? What would I be doing if I wasn't looking at this website? And so on and so forth. So you can realize the amount that you're actually using. Tip 2 is to reduce the energy usage. So when it comes to websites, you can switch your or search engines. You can switch your search engine from Google to Ecosia. So Ecosia plants trees anytime that you search it, and they don't do ad revenue that isn't going to fossil fuel companies. So they're trying to dedicate all of their revenue towards climate action. Another thing that you can do on your computer is putting everything on dark mode. Dark mode is an easy way to just make sure that you're saving 42% of your screen energy, but it starts to bleed into all of the devices that you use, and that has a knock-on effect. This is one of my favorite tips. I'm sure that all of you have realized that AI is embedded to everything that you do now. If you didn't ask for it, that's okay. This tip will make you have the power to take away AI. So if you are using Google search, if you put minus AI into your search, it will remove any of the Gemini suggestions. AI accounts for almost 10 times the amount as a regular search. So this is a quick way to minimize your footprint if you're not looking for an AI solution. Another great tip is saving your websites, your favorite websites as bookmarks. It feels really simple, but having those at your fingertips then allow you to not have to go into Google search and actually look for your own business on search when you definitely know the URL. Why not tailor and curate your bookmarks to have all of your needed and accessible sites ready? The biggest tip of this is that ChatGPT should not be your search engine. If there's something to walk away from, please remember this one. It is a huge large language modeling process that is using generative AI to be able to give you a solution. One ChatGPT query equates to about 20 minutes of light. Again, when we have the tangible effects of what those behaviors do, we can start to see what is going on in that. It generates 10 times the amount of energy as a Google search. Tip 3 is to look at the web sustainability guidelines. So this is something that Wholegrain, alongside a few other agencies, have come together to be able to make a free, readily available guideline so that people can feel empowered to go and make their own website sustainable today. It covers an immense amount of topics, but we're only going to touch on a few today. The first one being images. So on your website, images have a big carbon impact. They have a very big visual effect too, but are you sure? There's been quite a number of tests to be able to see, to be able to track where people are actually looking on your site. So things like Hotjar allow you to be able to track and see where people actually engage on the site. So you may think you have a very impactful web image, but have you actually tried it? This is a test done on the Yale School of Management site. And as you can see, the eye tracking for this course and how to apply to a specific management degree, the image didn't do any value. Everyone was looking at the information. But this is just one example. And of course, images definitely do serve a purpose. So if we're going to have it, what can we do? Well, the first one is doing efficient format. So by converting a JPEG to something like WebP or AVIF, you could be saving so much carbon without changing the actual look and feel of the actual image. So people will see the exact same thing on there and it won't actually change anything about it. You can also do something called responsive image sizing. So depending on the device that someone uses, if I'm on my big laptop, I've got a second screen presenting right now. I don't need to have an image that's ready for this screen to then go onto my phone. That is just asking too much data to be forced into there. So thinking about the responsive images is a great way to do that. And another tip is lazy loading. So lazy loading is essentially not loading an image until someone scrolls to that part of the web page. So you're not asking the web page to download anything until it needs to. But then there's going that little bit farther. So thinking through designing through a sustainable lens, which is low carbon image styling. So I'm going to give you an example of a client that we worked with, UKGBC. So we redesigned their website and we were looking at their imagery and they were using stock images. So they definitely added enhancements onto the site, but it didn't feel extremely personal to them. That old homepage image was a JPEG and it was 2 megabytes. Again, that might not mean anything to you. So we were just thinking about, okay, let's just switch the type of format it's in. So with best practice, we did it in AVIF and WebP, and it moved it down to 60 to 80 kilobytes per image. But again, this was a chance for them to rethink their image. They're about to launch a new website. So our designers collaborated with them to think about, okay, what can we do to make a creative design? So we actually thought about doing this pixelated effect on all of their imagery. And it was not just AVIF, but it was in sustainable design and got to 5.10 kilobytes, which was 99.5% smaller than the original image. But by thinking through this sustainable lens, it gave them a new edge on their branding too. It was imagery that was then bled throughout the website, but also onto their print documents too. So when we start to think with sustainability, it's not about minimizing creativity of like taking out and reducing, but working within the framework that we're given to be creative. Another really exciting example of that is with Volkswagen. So as Chris said at the top, Volkswagen isn't traditionally someone that you think would be paired with Wholegrain, but it almost was the perfect storm in that sense. Tom Greenwood had called them out on, the emission scandal that they had, and then talking about their marketing to come back from that. Volkswagen got in touch and said, well, show us how to do sustainable web design. So through collaboration and consultancy, we thought beyond not just sustainable web design, but sustainable engagement. So they have their normal page, which has their new electric vehicles, but they had a toggle on there to have sustainable browsing experience. And so when they toggled it, it actually changed the image to be in all code. So you can clearly see this as a car here, but it gave the user a chance to think, wait, what is sustainable web design? Wait, why do they have this? And having an engagement piece with the brand. So taking it that edge further. All right, we've talked about websites and search engines. We're moving now into emails and video. So tip 4, considerate email habits. So these are things that you can do right away. So avoiding unnecessary emails. So thinking before you think, confirming receipt to only those that need to know, proofreading before you send, maybe even setting up a delay send. So if you catch a mistake, you can edit it before it hits anyone's inboxes. Another one is avoiding forwarding long email chains. So when you get into 20 responses from there, are all of those relevant? It could be helpful to not ask the email to download all of that information and all of the documents attached to that. Within that, don't CC people who don't need to read the email. Maybe there's an initial one that goes all back, but if you need to just respond to one person and say received, that's a great way to minimize your carbon footprint. And link to files that are already in the cloud rather than attaching them so that you can avoid duplicate files. Why should this matter? Because there is a big impact of our emails. A spam email has about 0.3 grams of CO2. An unnecessary email, so an email with 4 words or less, has approximately 1 gram of carbon. A standard email is about 4 grams of carbon, which is an equivalent weight to about an almond. And a long email with attachments could create up to 50 grams of carbon. So you can see the sequential gain as they go through. But what does that all add to? So about 1,000 emails is equivalent to a flight from London to Paris. I can guarantee you with the amount of people that are on this call, the emails that we sent this week, we could have gone on a flight to Paris, but how many of those could have been avoided? And that's the tip that we want to make sure that sticks with you. So I know these were tips to go forward, and a lot of you probably have a lot of historical emails. You're gonna have to delete them. There are some things to help you with that, such as cleanfox.io. It helps unsubscribe you to forgotten newsletters and delete old messages. So that can help you get that bulk of the emails out of there. But moving forward and to help with the ongoing organization, setting up automation folders to simplify your email management could be a great way to do that. It gives you that breakpoints to be able to just look at certain sections without feeling overwhelmed by the immense amount of emails that you have to go through. The next tip that we're going to go into is video. So as we said at the top, turning off your camera, especially on big webinar calls like this, is very important to turn your camera off. It can save up to 96% of the carbon during an hour-long call. So thank you everyone for actually doing this because this is massive. We understand that having your camera on is a necessary part of business. I'm in new business, so being able to actually see people online, that's really important to be able to build up a rapport. So if you're going to do it, make sure that you blur your background on every call because that could be minimizing the carbon output as well. But what we should really be asking ourselves is, could this video been an email? There are some times that we get on a call and it builds much longer than we should, when actually we could have just made it that small impact of an email, because video is definitely more carbon inducive than video. Sorry, video is definitely more carbon inducive than email. Whew, that was the wrong tip. But all of this boils down to ensuring that you have conscious usage. So it may feel self-explanatory, but checking yourself is the first step all of us can do in minimizing our impact. As with all sustainability initiatives, it doesn't happen overnight, and we need to take steps to learn new habits, expectation change, policies improve, and general welfare can increase from it. So we need to ask ourselves, what do we actually need? So when we're going to save things onto our phone, how many photos that we're going to be taking, it's just important to take that step back of, why are we doing this? Or why is this important to us? And we're not telling you to become a Luddite and go completely offline. That would be quite hypocritical of us. But it's more about, when we are in that space, what do we want to get out of this? What kind of engagement are we looking for? So use this as an opportunity to curate your digital life and think about what's going to be important to you. But just to take it that little bit step further, at Wholegrain, we are thinking beyond just sustainable web design. And that is really what led us into thinking about sustainability on a grander scale and led us to thinking about climate justice. And climate justice is in reach, and digital sustainability is intrinsically tied to that. There have been plenty of times in history where we haven't had enough information, or the time to actually tackle something when it comes to climate change. I think plastic is a great example of that. If we knew the impacts of plastic in the first 10, 15, even 20 years of its production, where would we be today in terms of having to tackle that recycling problem? Well, I'm going to give you the gift that you now have the information on what we need to do when it comes to tackling digital carbon emissions. I gave you the impact of it now, but AI is absolutely going to increase the digital carbon emissions tenfold. So thinking about that in the context that we have now, we can actually make the change for our future selves and future generations to come. It's important for us as individuals to take action. It's important for us as businesses to take action. But ultimately, we need to challenge those in charge of our shared technology so that we can keep the digital sphere open, fair, and inclusive for generations to come. And that's why here at Wholegrain, we really prioritize designing a web that is for people and planet centric. But we hope that you guys can do that with us because we can't do it alone. So just to summarize, I know there's a lot of information there and there's tons more information available, but these are just ones that you can minimize your footprint today. So blur your background on all your video calls, try and lower your screen brightness, using Wi-Fi over data, unsubscribe from those newsletters, just get them gone. Curate your cloud, look at your images, make your own photo albums, dark mode everything. Set calendar reminders to digital declutter because it is an ongoing thing. I even have to set reminders too, just to check in to make sure that I'm also, keeping on top of that. But also test your own website's footprint or any website that you love. But yeah, that is our presentation. I really feel grateful to be able to present to you guys. I'm going to pass it back to Christina to be able to wrap it up and go through some questions in the poll.
Thank you, Bailey. That was fascinating. And I already have a really long list myself of things that I need to do. I am a classic for those subscription emails that I intend to read at some point and never get round to. So I'm sure everybody else does too. And please pop your questions in the chat. This is now an opportunity to ask Bailey and Chris some questions. I'm going to start off though with my question is really around, I'm a small business. I've got lots going on. Everyone's telling me AI is going to solve all my problems for me and I should use all these apps and things like that. How do I choose and how do I make a good decision around what do I start to spend time on in terms of new digital, tools, and where do I get more conscious and actually reduce my activity in that area? Have you got any tips on how to do that?
I think that's a brilliant question for Chris, given he's the managing director. That's probably something you've had to think about quite a bit.
Yeah, the activist inside of me wants to say just prioritize the impact, prioritize the carbon, prioritize all those things and forget AI, but we know that's not an option. I think it's the key word here is balance. The key word is understanding some AI is already integrated and we can't escape that. Some AI does save us, pains me to say it, but does save us, I guess, workload in other areas and efficiency in other areas. So I think that would be the way up to make, just really weigh up, is the impact of your choice worth the efficiency that it saves you? There's a quick win and it's just going to be a really short-term gain. Carbon emission is not a short-term problem, it's a long-term problem. So if you're looking for a quick win and it comes at the price of a long-term impact, then that for me would be the line to say no. So yeah, the key word there is balance, I think, across those things. It's particularly, as Bailey said, there's a line for us where we quite often feel like you can very easily steer into hypocritical because we do design and build websites for the internet, essentially. And so that also is a pretty relevant thought process to everything outside of AI as well, just around your activities and your marketing and all of those things as well.
And absolutely what you're saying, Bailey, about consciously choosing is so relevant in all of the things we're talking about here. We've got a question here from Eva who's asking, how important do you think it is for a business to measure its actual digital carbon, given that there's a lot of generic statistics out there already? Do we really need to know specific numbers, or do we already have enough of an idea?
When it comes to your own personal footprint or your business footprint, absolutely. You can't minimize what you can't measure, or you can't. Yes, that is it. I am getting like tripped up on my own advice right now. Yeah, but you can't minimize what you can't measure. And so when you're looking at your own website, you can start to think, oh, well, you might think you're good. And then you start to see it in the context of everyone else who's measured their impact as well. So that's what the website carbon calculator is really good for, because you can start to see where you are on that global scale. The average web page is about 0.8 grams of carbon. So if you're starting to see that you're way below that, and you're seeing, okay, well, measure that up with the engagement of the page. That's where it starts to make that difference too. So it's not just the carbon emission, but if you have a very heavy, unperforming website, that means people aren't going to engage in it with. So they're not maybe getting that critical information that you want to share. They're not getting in touch with you. They're not understanding your services because they're not actually getting to the page in general. So once you start to pull the string of digital sustainability, you realize it's not only affecting the performance of the page, it's the user experience, and then ultimately the business bottom line.
And you mentioned that, you know, that Yale had their website analyzed. Where can you go to get that done for your own website if you wanted to?
Oh, well, there are so many UX tools out there. I'm sure Chris can get on that, but Hotjar is the one that I mentioned, and that's a great one because you can get live user experience. There's a bunch of options that you can do. So you can do like a user eye testing, so where they're actually looking at. There's a heat map, so where their mouse is going. You can have someone verbalize their experience on the web page of being like, okay, well, I see the services here, but I don't really get what's going on. I'm going to go back and then just see how they actually behave on the site, because as businesses, we can be so blinded by our own site. You know, you're looking at it so much, but it's actually nice to get that fresh perspective. Who are you actually creating this website for? It's critical to think about your internal staff, your team, etc. But you're ultimately designing for your audience. So if you're not speaking to your audience, how do you know how it's actually being used?
Yeah, there's a side question here from Tess in the chat, sorry, about measuring the carbon impact of an image. Is it a calculate like a specific image? Is it a calculation, or is it based on size? Well, the honest answer is that if you think about what our development team talk about quite a lot is digital degrowth, which is the bigger it is, the more data, the more energy, and as Bailey spoke through, essentially that calculation just ends up in more carbon. So one of the easiest ways to get that sort of overall view without having to sort of, you know, learn this whole new language of carbon and digital sustainability and impact, one of the easiest ways is to look at the UX of your site overall and just reduce the unnecessary. If you take your website to a UX specialist and they're like, your user journeys have 5 or 6 more clicks than they need to, there are 20 more pages than you need to. That type of audit is the sort of entryway audit that is the easiest way to understand. I have unnecessary content. My image sizes are too big. I can compress all of these things down, and that's where you can get, that's an entryway through to being able to understand the impact of your overall site without having to wade in full into, okay, how do I measure the carbon of every single piece of this site? There's definitely a UX doorway through.
Yeah, because when you start thinking about it, it can get quite daunting. You know, you think, how many web pages have I got, and how many files am I sending, and how many email, and you know, you can kind of get into it. It gets overwhelming quite quickly. But I love that, you know, there's some key principles here that you've been talking about, Bailey. And one of my questions was going to be around, you know, how do you start to bring those principles into your work ethic or your kind of digital practices within your business? How do you kind of start to create that culture? Do you have any recommendations to start that beyond creating a policy?
It's not an easy answer because there isn't one solution. And I think that's the through line with all of this. It's not like AI is not going to solve this. One conversation is not going to solve this. One cleanup of your email isn't. I feel like a lot of people probably on this call are potentially the sustainability champion within their own business and feel maybe a little bit alone. But the crux of it is actually starting the conversation and talking to more people about it and making it more approachable, because you know, it's more than like more than one person is going to care about it. There are lots of reasons to care about it, and you're going to start to find those things that connect you. Like at Wholegrain, we talk about digital sustainability all the time, and we actually started our own climate cafe with Andy, who's actually on the call right now. And it was a place for us to be able to just talk about sustainability in general, because we would get so bogged down in our day to day, but we needed a place that felt safe to be able to talk about it. And at first, I don't want to say nothing tangible was coming out of it. Like we didn't have a set goals, but through those conversations, we started to create goals and actions and things that have then bled in. More people have joined because we've shared the information with our wider team. And so the culture has to start with you, but you can't get bogged down if maybe you're that sole person. You've got to keep going. You've got to keep fighting, because I mean, anyone who's in the climate justice space knows that you can't get kicked down after the first one. So you got to keep pushing through. Anything to add to that, Chris? And from an MD, I think you've been creating that culture.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, and the line you said was exactly perfect, Bailey. You just can't do it on your own. You need a couple of champions. As long as you get those people in the team. Our designers, they may not have started their career in a space being like, I want to design, human-centric, low-carbon websites. But the challenge of that for a designer and how to creatively solve that problem, that's what designers live for, right? How do you creatively solve a problem? So if you just reframe it and just place it into the teams in those different ways, it doesn't have to feel heavy and large and a big thing, like we need to pivot and do this whole new thing. It doesn't need to be that. It can be much more about collaboration, openness, conversation, and all of those really positive things that just breeds really quality work anyway. So it's kind of a win-win, because it produces low carbon work, it produces human-centric work, but it also gives your team a real sense of belonging to that conversation and that culture of change, which is what we strive for all of the time.
Mm-hmm. And there's quite a lot of comments in the chat around culture and how you get people engaged, how you influence people within a company when, AI is exciting, and all of our CEOs are saying you should go start using these new things because it's cool. How to kind of maintain that possibly less exciting message of, but maybe we should do a little less, can be quite challenging in a world where we always want to have the new shiny tech opportunity. So yeah, I love that. I think somebody mentioned in the chat, there's a digital sustainability community in Brighton called Green Software Brighton. It's in the chat if anyone wants to get involved in that. But yeah, it sounds like there's movements happening and starting, and this conversation is very much early stages, and I think we'll be having more of them as we go forwards. I've got quite a few questions in the chat around specific things like someone says, doesn't turning on the background blur on Zoom consume more computing power, so it's actually less green? I'm not sure if you could just comment on that one. You'd have to look at it, I suppose.
Yeah, I need a dig there.
Yeah. And then someone else is asking about the best system to create websites to make it lighter. And I think with these specific questions, we can probably take away and look at, see if we can provide some resources in a follow-up email.
Yeah, there's some great questions around hosting providers in here as well, which I can see some people jumping in with Crystal and things like that. So we can definitely give you some info on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Happily follow up with that.
Yeah, and so it's really, I think the culture question is really interesting one. I'm really interested also to know personally around, we all of our lives are kind of starting to merge. We have our work emails on our personal phones and vice versa, and we use social media for work and personal, and it's all mixed together. So as a business, it must be very difficult to see what your business impact is and where it ends with the individuals that work for your business. I'm not sure if there is an answer to this, but is there, where does that measuring end from the business's responsibility?
Yeah, it's such a good question. There's there's a lot of accountability on businesses for what they provide for their team, both in terms of the environment and in terms of growth and in terms of flexibility and benefits. And it does come back to culture. It does come back to this idea that I'm not your dad. I'm just somebody who works beside you at work. And if we can use our business to help inform choices that people make or information that people have to then make their own choices, that feels like a very natural line for me. I'm not going to steer anybody and force anybody into, at Wholegrain, we have a no fly for business policy. That doesn't mean that we shun our team if they choose to fly on holiday, for example, but we do put incentives in place saying, so rather than fly, if you don't fly and you take a sustainable travel method, we'll give you that as a non-holiday day so that you don't lose it. So there's incentivization, and there's it comes back to that idea of sharing that responsibility and sharing our information and our just building a really solid community so that people feel safe to talk about. Everybody has the guilty pleasure, right? I remember our client success director saying that she recently went to a seminar, and at the seminar at the beginning, somebody stood up and stage and said, okay, well, we all work in climate activism, but what's your guilty pleasure? And one lady at the back put her hand up and said, I just really like a long hot bath. And then everybody just one by one kept saying, and you know, those things are real, they're human things. We're not, as a business, in any shape or form in a space where we can say to somebody, can you just stop taking a bath in the evening, please? So I think it's just about conversation. It's about understanding that we are human beings. We all have those things that we enjoy, but whilst you're at work, we can give you tips and tricks that can help your personal life as well.
Love that. I don't think anyone should stop having hot baths if that's their guilty pleasure.
Absolutely not. Completely agreed.
Oh, well, fantastic. This has been a really, really informative webinar, and we've got lots of comments in the chat around all the things that people are learning. And obviously your digital decluttered toolkit will be coming out, and we'll be letting everyone know who registered for this webinar when that happens. And we'll also be sharing the video on the website, on the Amplifi website after this session, and we'll be sending out that information along with any other tips and tricks that we come up with between now and that email. I've definitely got lots of things to work on for my own digital footprint, and I'm sure everyone else has. So I would love to hear in the chat what, if anything, is the first action you're going to take as a result of this webinar. So please pop that into the chat. We'd love to know what's really sparked your interest. What is the thing that you think, oh yes, I definitely am going to start doing that. So things like, you know, turning on the dark mode on your computer just seems to me to be a no-brainer, and I'm definitely going to do that from now on. So yeah, please let us know. And then also I'd love to pop that poll up again and find out if anything has changed since we started the session. So if you could answer, how confident are you now that to take concrete steps? Are you much more confident than you were before? Love to see the results of that question. And I'd love to thank you all for your attendance on today's webinar. We'll be asking another question in a second once that answer comes up. If you would like to stay updated on further events, please do sign up to our mailing list, which is on amplifi.tw. And our next webinar is actually going to be on the 19th of March on the topic of the circular economy and how to make your business more circular. And that's going to be with Tracy Sutton from Root. So leading on, I'm sure there will be some circularity topics around your tech, for example. Oh, and it looks like, so we are somewhat, if not very confident that we can take concrete steps now on our digital practices. So that's a really positive improvement. So that's fantastic. And our final question, how informed do you feel now? And how informed will you feel going forwards, given that we're going to give you lots more information in the toolkit? Please let us know. And we really hope that you can help us amplify the impact of this webinar by sharing what you've learned on this call today with others. So we are a business community based in Tunbridge Wells, but these topics are relevant to everybody, and the message and the knowledge that we want to share through these webinars, we would love to kind of spread as far as we possibly can. And on that note, if you do have any expertise that you'd like to share with our members through our webinars, then please do get in touch with the Amplifi team. And it looks like we're also somewhat, if not very, informed now as a result of that, the fantastic presentation from Bailey and Chris. So Chris, Bailey, do you have any final comments, closing words before we go?
First of all, that was like having my school report card in real time. So there was a lot of trauma brought back there. Second of all, just to say thank you for joining. Thank you. There's some really great questions in the chat. We'll definitely have a look through and come back around. There's some really interesting conversations in there. If in the meantime you have any other questions or conversations, please feel free to reach out to either Bailey or myself, either through the Wholegrain site or through LinkedIn. And yeah, we'd like to keep the conversation going for sure.
Fantastic.
Yeah, no, I completely echo that. This is what gets me up in the morning, being able to share this stuff and be able to feel like we can take a bigger step in terms of, minimizing our carbon emissions. I can send one less email today, but just seeing all the stuff that you guys are doing in the chat, like that really excites me. And I'm glad that you guys found this really informative. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. And thank you from us at Amplifi. Thank you for being a great audience, and we're very much looking forward to the rest of our series. So please keep an eye out for our emails, and please do sign up. And we'd love to see you again very soon.